So, we all know the story of the boat, the Titanic, right? It was the largest ship of its time, and it hit an iceberg on April 15, 1912, and killed over 1,500 people. But do you know the true reason the ship sank? During construction of the Titanic, they were supposed to use very large bolts. The bolts were supposed to keep the sides of the ship together. The people paying for the ship to be built did not want to pay for the expensive bolts, so they decided to use much smaller bolts instead. If they had used the bolts they were supposed to use, they should have been able to go through the iceberg with no problem. But the smaller bolts, when they hit the iceberg, the sides of the hole popped off, and it was one of the most tragic events in American history. And what can we learn from this? And how can we apply this to our spiritual lives? We need to remember that being close to God and being a strong Christian doesn't mean just looking the part. It means being able to stay strong even when we are tested. A good example of this is in the Bible in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 29, which says, Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, but it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. It's the same when the Titanic was tested by the iceberg and sunk. So was the man's house that was built on the sand when it was tested by the weather and collapsed. We need our spiritual lives to be like the man who built his house on the rock. So when we are tested, we stay strong. We can't only look on the outside like a Christian, with our cross necklaces and our wristbands with the Christian fish on them. This all means nothing if we can't hold up and be strong when we are tested. It's perfectly fine if you like to wear those things, as long as you are also clean and holy on the inside. How do we know when we are not only clean on the outside, but also clean inside? We know this when we are tested and we do not fall into temptation, and instead are able to stand strong in God's will. When I was 6, my grandparents used to live in Virginia, and we went to visit them the last week before they moved to Kentucky. My grandpa took me and my dad out to a dumpster on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere to show us a cat that had just had kittens. We got there and brought food out to the cats who were hiding at the tree line on the road. I stepped forward with a bowl of food and I offered it to the cats. And one little kitten bravely came forward when the others wouldn't. He took my food and let me pet him. And after a while, we took the kitten back home to my grandma's house. We named him Silver, and he would stay with my grandparents and their other cats on a nice house near the woods where he could run and play and have a great life. A few years later, my grandparents moved to Tennessee, near Bristol. They still lived out in the country, and Silver still had plenty of room to let his inner tiger out. One day, I called my grandma to ask what happens to Silver when her and my grandpa are no longer able to care for him. She replied by saying it was always their plan for Silver to go to me in a situation like that. As you know, my grandma is in town, and she's visiting us, and she brought some sad news. Silver was hit and killed by a car last week. So right now, this is a very testing time for me and my family. It's very easy for one of us to fall into a depression, to stop praying, to stop going to church. But we know that as strong Christians, we must continue on and persevere through this challenging time. I may never get to see Silver here on this earth again. He will never be passed over to me to take care of him. But instead of focusing on the negative, we should focus on the positive. Silver had a great life. He was one of the happiest cats you will ever see. And I know that right now he is still playing in heaven, and that one day I will see him again in God's kingdom. We need to know that as Christians, God is always with us. And even if things seem awful and like they couldn't get any worse, God is still there watching over us. All of the terrible things that we have and will go through in life can only make us stronger and to make us a more incredible human being. Every setback that we experience makes us evolve into a more incredible human being. It makes us learn so much about life, about how it is very difficult. And there are setbacks. But with faith on the right path, with God, when our ship begins to sink, our house begins to crumble, in order to save our ship, to keep it afloat, or to keep our house strong, when times are hard, we need to develop ourselves and our relationship with God. We need to remain and understand what that verse really means, what Scripture really means, instead of only reading the Bible, thinking that we know what God is trying to say. We can be in a relationship with God, and we can pray to God, or just communicate and talk with God about our thoughts and our feelings. I strongly encourage everyone here today, this week, try to read something. Try to look at things in your life that you are mourning. Look at them in a different light, in a different view. Try to look at the positive things in all of those situations. Hopefully doing this, all of you can get over the events in your life that are holding you back from your spiritual life. Thank you. Amen.